In the autumn of 1857, the iron town of Black Ridge, Pennsylvania, was a place that survived on smoke. The furnaces burned day and night. Coal dust clung to collars and window panes. Men descended into shafts before sunrise and returned long after dark, their faces smudged into anonymity. It was not a town of questions. It was a town of endurance. And yet, within a single year, 22 children vanished, not abducted in the night, not taken by wolves or swept away by the river. They simply did not return home. At first, the disappearances seemed unconnected. A 9-year-old boy who failed to come back after catechism lessons, 2 sisters who never arrived for supper, a farmhand's son who wandered into town for schooling and was never seen again. Each family searched, each family waited. But in a town where poverty was common and accidents frequent, tragedy rarely stirred public panic. Children sometimes drowned, children sometimes ran, children sometimes disappeared into distant relatives' homes. That was the explanation offered, quietly, repeatedly, by Reverend Silas Morton. Reverend Morton presided over the town's Methodist Mission Chapel, a small wooden structure that stood at the edge of the mining road. He was respected, educated, and newly arrived from Ohio. His sermons were stern, but hopeful. He spoke often of discipline, sacrifice, and spiritual refinement. Most importantly, he offered something the town desperately needed: free schooling. The chapel basement had been converted into a modest classroom. Rough benches, slate boards, narrow windows set high into the stone walls. It was not elegant, but it was safe, or so it seemed. The miners sent their children gladly. Education meant opportunity. Education meant escape. No one questioned what happened after lessons ended. By spring of 1858, the pattern was undeniable. The missing children all had one thing in common: they had attended the mission school. Still, no formal complaint was filed. In Black Ridge, accusations required proof, and proof required someone brave enough to look. That someone arrived in June. Her name was Clara Whitfield, 26 years old, recently widowed, former school teacher from Harrisburg. She'd come to Black Ridge seeking employment and anonymity after her husband's death in a rail accident. When she heard that Reverend Morton sought assistance in the classroom, she volunteered. She would later testify that something felt wrong on her first day. The children were unusually quiet, not merely disciplined, subdued. Several bore faint bruises on their wrists. One child flinched violently when a book fell from a desk. And then there were the empty seats. 22 names remained written on chalk on the attendance board. When Clara asked what had become of them, Morton smiled thinly. "Families relocate," he said. "Mining towns are transient by nature." But no forwarding addresses existed, no letters, no farewells.
Clara began keeping notes. At first, they were harmless observations: irregular lesson hours, locked storage cabinets, unexplained absences. But gradually her attention turned to the basement itself. The classroom floor was stone, uneven in places. One corner was perpetually covered by a large rug. When she inquired about it, Morton answered curtly, "Storage beneath." But the rug was nailed down. And Clara noticed something else. On certain evenings, long after lessons ended, a wagon would arrive behind the chapel. No lanterns, no church elders, just Morton and a broad-shouldered man she did not recognize. Crates were carried out. Children were not seen leaving. In August, another child vanished. Thomas Hale, age 11. His mother refused to remain silent. She stormed into the chapel demanding answers. Morton met her on the steps, voice calm, posture rigid. "Your son has been placed into apprenticeship," he explained. "A charitable opportunity in Philadelphia. He will learn a trade." She had signed no papers. Morton insisted she must have. That night, Clara visited the Hale home. The mother swore she had never agreed to such a thing, and then she said something that chilled Clara to the bone. Thomas said Reverend Morton told him he was chosen. Chosen. Clara waited until dusk the following evening. She remained behind after class, pretending to organize slates. When Morton retired upstairs to his office, she pried loose the nails holding down the rug. Beneath it was a wooden trap door, locked, but old. The hinges resisted only briefly. Below lay a narrow cellar passage, too deliberate to be accidental. It smelled of lime and damp earth and something metallic. There were no bodies. Instead, there were shackles, small ones, fastened to the wall. Beside them, ledgers, carefully written, dates, names, ages, transfer destinations. But the destinations were not towns. They were codes. Facility 3, East. House 7, River Route. Shipment cleared. Shipment. Clara did not wait to decipher further. She ran.
The sheriff of Blackridge was a reluctant man named Walter Crane. He had dismissed earlier rumors as hysteria, but the ledgers changed everything. A raid was conducted at dawn. Morton did not resist arrest. He claimed innocence, claimed the transfers were benevolent placements into work programs for orphaned or impoverished youth. Yet few of the children were orphans, and no contracts existed. The cellar yielded more evidence: sedatives, correspondence with unknown benefactors in New York and Baltimore, and receipts bearing only initials. Morton refused to identify his associates. He insisted he had saved children from hunger. But investigators would soon uncover the truth. The coded destinations were not factories. They were private institutions, workhouses, industrial farms, some bordering on forced labor camps, operating beyond regulatory oversight. Children were sold into contracts that lasted until adulthood, paid for, silenced, moved across state lines where tracking them became impossible. Of the 22 missing from Blackridge, records would eventually trace 14. 8 were never located. Morton's trial began in January 1859. It drew attention from newspapers across Pennsylvania. The defense argued moral ambiguity. They insisted that in an era without welfare systems, indenture provided structure and survival. The prosecution presented shackles and the word shipment. Clara Whitfield testified calmly, methodically. She described the cellar, the ledgers, the children's fear. When asked what convinced her of wrongdoing, she answered simply, "Children do not flinch from kindness." Morton was convicted of unlawful confinement, fraud, and trafficking minors across state lines. He was sentenced to 20 years in Eastern State Penitentiary. But the larger network dissolved before further arrests could be made. Letters burned, contacts vanished. The system extended beyond one chapel, and likely beyond one town. Blackridge never fully recovered. Parents carried guilt heavier than coal sacks. The mission chapel was demolished in 1862. In its place stands nothing. No plaque, no marker, only an open patch of grass beside the mining road. Clara left Pennsylvania 2 years after the trial.
Her journals, preserved by distant relatives, remain the primary account of what occurred beneath the chapel floor. In one entry, written months after the conviction, she posed a question that still lingers. How many towns mistook obedience for virtue? Today, historians estimate that throughout the mid-19th century, thousands of impoverished children were placed into questionable labor contracts under religious or charitable oversight. Many arrangements were lawful, many were not. The line between salvation and exploitation was often drawn in invisible ink. Blackridge was not unique, it was merely uncovered. The 8 children never located are remembered in church archives by name alone. No graves, no closure, only absence. And in mining towns across Pennsylvania, stories still circulate of wagons arriving after dusk, of ministers who spoke of opportunity, of children who were chosen and never came home.